Hello, today we're going to talk about the ethics of creativity or creation, ethics of art making, which I've mentioned several times in previous videos, and today feels like the day. So, I'm slightly worse lit than usual. I'm also wearing black. And that all feels really appropriate because I've got just a bit of my face that's a bit shadowy, you know? You got the light side and the dark, you got the yin and the yang, and I guess all this is a lot dark, so plenty of dark, hey? I mean, we're not 50-50. I'd have to, maybe if I cover the screen like this, then it'll be really, then we'll really have a, I don't know, an accurate portrayal of reality. What do I know? So, I tend to operate from a standpoint that you can kind of find, you can kind of find in a previous video I made where I think it's called Brogue. He talks about creativity for 45 minutes, and my head's really narrow in it, and I've got a shaven head, and a blue jumper, I think, so you can look that up. You can also find the base for this stuff, the base for my philosophy around this, a little bit in Jordan Peterson, who kind of uses the Bible as a jumping off place for the argument that something is better than nothing. So for this video, I'm going to assume that something is better than nothing. I'm not going to try and flesh that out too much, except to notice that it influences me sufficiently to say that while I basically think of art as amoral. That is, it tends to take on the moral valences of the values it serves, say, or the people it serves, probably. And yeah, often creative works really have a surprising ability to transcend moral dogma, at least, or yeah. They tend to be interpretable in many ways, which is good. Now I say mostly amoral. I've written notes for this talk because my previous videos have been pretty rambly. I don't know if you've noticed, but yeah, I thought I'd write a little scaffold for this one because I'm trying to cover some philosophical territory. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a musician. And a budding psychologist, so that's where I'm coming from. So I say art is mostly amoral, but errs on the side of the good in the sense that that I think more often than not, you're better off making the thing, whatever the thing is, providing that you're open to feedback about it. So I think it is good to put, like bad artwork into the world, even if it's like, even if it's, it involves being derogatory about a particular racial group or something, makes a mistake. Yeah, well, or maybe it's deliberate, I don't know, but it does that. It's better to put that out as long as you're open, as long as you're listening. I feel like I had a bunch of thoughts and I didn't, they flitted behind my eyes and didn't get out my mouth. So, I was mostly amoral. It's better to make the thing than not make it, because, so, I would say art tends, this is all generalizing, but art tends to sit in a place where it doesn't affect people in a really directly physical way. Now, and that's not to say it doesn't run our world. I really think stories, certainly, are like that they construct the world for us, and so artworks, things like films, are, I think, incredibly influential to the way people see the world, and paintings and music and all this. So I'm not saying that art doesn't matter, that's for sure, but it doesn't affect us in the same direct way that political policies might, or physical action might. If I come over and give you a hug or punch you in the face, these things are going to affect you in a direct physical way. Bam, boom. And I think politically, there are things, well, you know, a government can conscript, for example. You send a bunch of people off to war, that affects them and the people around them in a really clear physical way. Art doesn't affect people quite this way most of the time, let's say. Now, it does sometimes. It does sometimes affect, like, you know, you can have a performance art piece where a hug to an audience member occurs. That's for sure. And, yeah, anyway. So I'm assuming that art occupies this space that is a little bit more removed from people's actual lives, which maybe is a mistake. I'd love to hear, let me know in the comments. But having that position on it kind of helps me helps me justify the idea that therefore you can make mistakes in art. You want to, almost. And so you put things out for people to look at. I put out my my anti-Semitic piece of work, and then everyone says, "Hey, what are you doing with this? Is this useful? It looks harmful to me." And then I can go, actually, now that you mention it, you're right, and I can produce the same effect without that kind of unnecessary harmfulness or whatever it is. Or maybe you can go, absolutely, this is necessary. I've thought about this. I can predict some of its effects. You can never predict the effect of pretty much any action, I would say. Like, you can some of the direct actions, but there's always a huge margin of error or unseen effects, right? You really learn that if you study science or especially the social sciences and stuff, because they try and, you know, make an intervention. Say you try and, like, you make people meditate every day, and it turns out those people, you know, the meditation causes, like, I'm making this up completely, the meditation causes trouble with their family because of the time it takes or something that you just never would have predicted. And so it turns out that despite improving people's mental health, it also increases people's chances of marriage decline or something. It's like, you just never would. Now that I should have used an example that was real. I can't think of one. I'm a creative guy, not a memorative guy, unfortunately. But hit me up in the comments with some real examples, or maybe some counter examples of where we really do seem to be able to measure things and not miss side effects. But I think that's so rare, you know. We made a car, actually, that's a real example somewhat, is when, I don't know if Ford actually invented the car, but he certainly sort of publicized it. When Ford made cars really readily available, he expected to get people from A to B quicker and for them to be happy about it. And that happened. He did not predict that it would radically transform society so that we now will build a shopping mall totally separate from our house and from our church and stuff like that, and kind of divide up society in a way that people can get all their basic needs without engaging with a community in the same way. And so cities they look different in a way that I doubt Mr. Ford would ever have predicted, and not just cities, but people's lives are so different now, and I suspect that contributes at least to a kind of, to the meaning crisis or whatever that is. It's like, you don't get your community just by stepping out your front door necessarily now. There are a lot of places where you can live an ordinary life and be utterly isolated. That wasn't quite as easy to isolate yourself before the car, I'd say. So there's an example of, unintended effects. It wasn't a scientific study, but I think it's a good example. It's an example I got from Jonathan Pajot. Surprise, surprise. I mention him a lot. I think he's great. So art exists in this space where we're saying it doesn't affect people directly, but that doesn't mean it doesn't affect people. It really does. And so you want to kind of think about whether you're doing the right thing by creating the thing that you're creating, blah, blah, blah. Which brings me, I'll just cover the really quick, I just have this pragmatic issue with the ethics of art making, which is that as soon as I start thinking, as soon as I get worried that what I'm going to make isn't going to be morally acceptable or something, it's gonna, I get worried it'll affect people badly or simply not be useful. As soon as I start imagining the effects of the art, as soon as I skip ahead to the end instead of engaging with the process, with exactly what I have in front of me, with the blank page, with the first word, blah, 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 step by step, or the first stroke of the paintbrush, or whatever it might be, first note. If I focus on the end goal, my creative juices dry the hell up and I can't make anything. If I can make anything, I'm not satisfied with it. And that seems to be very common. Lots and lots of people report this. When teaching to write essays, many people, like just in my uni course, we get told, or the sort of, we were told, you write your essay first and then you edit it, because most people can't work the critical faculties and the creative faculties simultaneously. It's hard to develop a healthy dance between the two. And maybe that sort of abstract, maybe that small process of creation and criticism within an essay, say, within the artwork, can be abstracted to the world, where I think art is where we can try out our new ideas. And so it's better to put the artwork out and try out that new idea of, you write about a utopia that seems different somehow. And so you put that out there and you don't actually instantiate the utopia. You don't go out and overthrow the government and try and set up the utopia. You try it out in a book first, right? Which I'm sure, I've definitely heard evidence of, like, Marxism came out of certain writers and such before it was implemented, before people attempted to implement it. And I'm not even going to touch whether that, the ethics of that, of Marxism, in this video at least, but probably not at all. I try and just kind of observe politics and not actually enter into them too much. But the word politics brings me to another side of this. I just realized something which I haven't said in other videos, which is that I think for whatever question I'm talking about in a video, maybe what I'm doing is circumambulating it. And that's a nice way of expressing what I'm doing, so that you can expect that. So you don't necessarily expect a coherent argument of one thing following another, and instead you can expect some like mini arguments, one thing following another, which are all pinned to the one central theme. So I think that's what I'm doing here. Because I think that way. I think one thing reminds me of another thing, reminds me of another thing, and while I am reminded about these things and detail them, I'm constantly being held close to the one general concept by its gravitational field. And so in this case, the subject is the ethics of creation. And so I've been brought by the word political to the argument that people make. I've got friends who make this argument. I think it's very fair. It's kind of a postmodern kind of perspective, maybe even modernist, I don't know. Heck, a lot of ideas when I find out about them, and maybe I hear about them from a postmodern writer, I then hear someone be like, say, well, actually Plato said that. So maybe it's a Platonic idea. Anyway, the idea that our art is inherently political and therefore has an inherent moral valence. So that there's the details of a specific artwork, even if it's, non-verbal, even if it's a painting or a musical work, the choices of notes, the medium on which it's released, the sort of, the place it is released, like the country, blah blah blah. This all contains political information that kind of points you in a political direction. Let's say, I write a minimalist musical work and I release it on Spotify. I am referring to like Steve Reich and Philip Glass and people like that by doing this. Therefore, I'm implicitly aligning myself a bit with their politics. They are referring to obliquely, but they are kind of associated with the Western classical canon generally, I think, and so I'm associating myself and aligning myself with the Western stuff, Western philosophy, let's say. I'm releasing it on Spotify, which is implicitly condoning like big corporate entities and capitalism. And then I'm not saying I agree with this perspective, by the way. We'll get to that. I'm releasing it in Paris, say, and so that means I think Paris is a worthwhile place to release music, and I'm prioritizing it above other countries and all sorts of things. And so there are these, I guess, political or philosophical biases inherent in the artwork, regardless of what I do. Even if I'm trying to reject them, then I am trying to reject them, and that's somehow politically important, according to this view. And therefore, there's an inherent moral valence in that. If it's inherently political, politics is... Well, I'm just going to assert this. I don't know if this is true, but I think that this argument has good reasons to say that if it's political, then it's got a moral valence. Therefore, art has an inherent moral valence. And I think this is technically true, but I'm not sure it's necessarily super relevant to us, or it's so hard to measure, like we were saying before, it's so hard to measure the results of your work, that you might think you're doing a really good thing. I mean, all the worst people in history thought they were doing a good thing. Hitler thought he was saving the world, I think. He certainly thought he was a good guy. I'm confident about that. I'm not saying he was. Once again, just to be clear, I think he was a very bad man. I think we're clear, but I think he's a really interesting person to study, and you should, I've been meaning to read his writings to really to try and understand what happened there, because we don't want to repeat that, and the best way to not repeat things is to remember them. You want to remember how they happened. You don't want to erase them from your history, or you do them again. And that happens in psychology all the time. We go I hate that I did that, and then we push it out of our mind, and then we do it again, instead of confronting it and figuring it out. And then often we can figure out how to not do it again, or how to slowly become more conscious of the thing and develop a better relationship with it. So, but yeah, I actually think that sort of technical argument for moral valence inherent in art is a little bit it's true, and there are probably some circumstances where it's really useful to be aware of. And I mean, this whole video is based around the premise that it's at least useful to examine the ethics of what you're doing as a creative person. But I do think it's a little bit it's a technical argument. It's a bit like getting because I don't, all I can see it pragmatically doing, all it's done for me, that argument, is make me blocked. It's make me unable to produce work because I'm paralyzed by the fear of doing damage. And I think that's not super useful. That's what I'm gonna claim. And I think it's a bit like I think it gets its level of resolution a little bit wrong. It's prioritizing being right. It's prioritizing making its argument, so it's finding a technical little route through the best way I have to describe it is, it's like saying I don't exist, that Toby doesn't exist, because at a certain atomic level, you can't really tell the difference between me and the world around me. You can't tell where my feet end and the floor begins, and you also can't tell that I am unified, that the atoms in my stomach have any relation to the atoms in my head. And so you could say I don't exist, but it's not super useful for the I. If I want to operate as me, that's just not a very useful thing to say. And so I prefer, when thinking about the ethics, to prioritize not actually ethics in your artwork, but ethics in your community. So if you can integrate yourself with a community of people who are going to be honest with you in a supportive way, because if you get people who are honest, I've had this, people who are honest with me, but they are very critical people. They're not artists. I haven't trained them to kind of encourage me. And as a result, because I'm a sensitive person, I was just demolished by their criticisms, which were valid criticisms, but I was not built to take it. So you want to be very wary about the communities you build around your creative work. And maybe Julia Cameron, in her The Artist's Way, her book, she has an exercise where you kind of draw concentric circles, and you've got like your innermost circle of people that you'd be confident sharing new budding work that's vulnerable. Did I say with whom you'd be confident sharing? Let's say I did. And then you've got the next row of people, like the next circle, and they might be, you're a bit more, you're not as close to them, you don't trust them as much, but once her work is at a certain stage, you might be confident sharing it with them. Then you get another circle, maybe, I can't remember how many circles she has, but for the sake of a brief argument, the final circle is people you probably don't want to show it to, that you know, maybe you could tell them that you've done it, and then outside of the circle you've got people who you just don't want to really include in your artistic world, that you might even try and avoid telling them that you've created or something. You might want to keep things secret. Yeah, but my point is, I think if you built a good community around you, and maybe the example of Hitler is useful here. I think Hitler built a community around him that was blindly supportive. I don't know. This is a bad example because I don't actually know that much about Hitler. I really do want to learn, but yeah, I believe that the people around him were either evil or corrupt, and so he wasn't able to really develop his moral compass all that much. Now, I'm not, I should be clear that I'm not saying that we are entirely products of our communities, but they're very useful. I think they have, to me, appeared the best safety, the best filter, the best moral filter, something like that. The best way to act freely and with enthusiasm in the world, within a space that, like, they create a space where you can make more mistakes, and those people will forgive you, and that way you can live and learn better. So I think that's the best way to go, is you create the thing and look at it yourself. Like, maybe there's no one you can show it to. Not everyone has access to wonderful communities. Maybe you've made something that is, and maybe you need to. I definitely, like, as a psychologist, that I'm not really, I'm a psychology student, but from the psychological perspective, or even just as a person, I've become aware that people, including myself, have just horrific thoughts all the time. Maybe not everyone, but most people I've met have had thoughts that are every evil word you can think of. They're racist, sexist, blah blah blah, and much worse, and maybe that needs to come out. In fact, I think it's wonderful to express that stuff in a private way, in your writing or something, because then you're aware of it, then you can see it, then you can deal with that instead of sort of trying to shove it down. In which case, if you've got any evil tendencies at all, I'm using the word evil, maybe I shouldn't, but I'm just using it to mean really like deliberately bad parts of you that want the worst, want to cause harm. Yeah, even if you've got an iota of evil in you, which you do, everyone does. That Solzhenitsyn quote that I keep quoting, the line between good and evil runs down the center of every human heart. It's something like that. That's just, my experience has been that's true. We all, like, if you think you haven't done something malicious, in your life, then you need to examine, have a little think, I think. Could be wrong. Maybe you're just a saint without effort, but I think that's unlikely. So we got this evil in it. So yeah, getting it out and expressing it, at least in private, just looking, like writing down all your darkest fantasies, etc. I think is really valuable. Then you can see and you can, and that avoids you instead not verbalizing, not being conscious of them, and therefore pushing things down and having them bubble up beyond your control. So you think you're having a nice conversation and then you just say something really kind of double-edged or something. You say something that really sounds hurtful and might not have been, and neither you nor the person you are talking to can really tell, but I guess that's where it starts, and you can go along, well, an endless way with that. You can become passive aggressive, or it gets mangled in all sorts of ways, and it's a personal exploration. But for example, you can start harming yourself and not knowing why, and people report like having really strong urges to walk in front of buses or trains or whatever, that kind of thing, or and no doubt these urges also exist to like push people in front of those things. My point is just, you can get very psychologically knotted up if you don't, and I think especially as an artist, because we're really always, we're full of stuff we don't understand. That's why we express it, or a lot of us are. It's really great to express the stuff you don't understand, to put it out there, and then to look at it. And then if you can find some people who are going to be open to it, you think, who you can trust with it, with your potentially dangerous or unethical artwork, then you can show it to them and you can see, and often you'll find they'll be like, yeah, that's fine, why are you worried? Especially if you're a neurotic person. But yeah, sometimes maybe they'll say, oh look, if I were you, I would not publicize that, and then you can have another look at it. But and I'm not saying you should do what your friends tell you. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're right. Your community, that is. Anyway, I guess where I was getting with that being tangled up psychologically is one last thought I have around the ethics of creation, which is that the to not create out of some ethical superiority, sense of superiority, or a genuine attempt to do the best in the world that you can manage. If you don't create and you're a creative person, often that is a really, really bad route to go down. Personally, it absolutely blew me apart. I stopped creating for about 6 months, which turned into 2 years. I told myself I would stop because I wanted to focus on uni, because I wanted to finish up my music degree way back in 2015 it was. Wanted to finish well, wanted to get better marks so I could, just in case I could up my chances of having more options later. And as a result, I became quite depressed because I stopped doing gigs, I stopped writing music, and just practiced classical music. But I didn't even practice that much. I didn't work very hard for uni because I was so depressed. I was so demolished by that absence in my life that it actually did much more harm than good. I think I got maybe even worse marks than I would have had I kept doing all my creative work. So that was a big lesson, and I didn't really learn it till like 2 years later because I was sort of thrown into such a rut by that, and I think that's where it started, where all the badness started. So yeah, I think it's very easy to, if you stop creating as a creative person, to start becoming resentful and blocked. It's harder and harder to restart if you stopped, and you start thinking things like the world is unjust and the world is a bitter, harsh place that doesn't provide for creatives, and that's why it didn't provide for me. you know, I don't have a place in the world as a creative person, and that can make you really bitter. And you also, the classic, or the one that's really familiar to me, is to start seeing other people's work, and instead of being like, this is great, even though I wouldn't make this, I would start to have the thought, I could do so much better. If I tried that, I would do so much better. And the clear response, the response that is clear to me now to that comment is, yeah, but you're not trying. Like, what are you doing? And I found that if I am trying, if I am creating stuff, I don't become jealous that same way. I might be like, oh, I wish I'd thought of that. But I'm capable of a much more encouraging attitude. I might say, oh, it's like, I wish I'd done that, but that's amazing. That's amazing work. That's so close to what I'm trying to do. Wow, I've really got to like get my shit together, get my game face on. Because look at all this other wonderful stuff similar to my work that is happening. So, yeah, I often think you really should create to avoid resentment. And you know, just because we're on the Hitler theme, this is a commonly held view by artists, I think. I don't know how much, it's hard to measure how valid it is, but maybe if Hitler had gotten into art school, because everyone knows, well, not everyone knows, apparently he tried out for several art schools and was turned down, and so he went into politics. I don't know if it's quite that direct a sequence, but had he gotten into art school and been cherished a little more, or maybe had he just persevered a little bit more with his art, maybe he would have done a bunch of intense paintings rather than genocide. Maybe. I certainly think that pattern is true, you know, that a lot of people have done a lot of... You see it in music teachers sometimes, and that's really sad. So most music teachers I know are great people who want the best for their students, and every now and then you see one who's like abusing that, like, now I should be very careful about my use of the word abuse, but who will just subtly undermine their students, or just make, mostly just subtly undermining them, who resents them, who's jealous of them in some usually quite quiet capacity, but who just says, well, or he tells them that the music industry is like not worth going into. You know, that they're just a discouraging force. And we need more courage in this world where it's full of cowards, clearly. Sorry, that was very biting, but I think it might be true, you know? I think it's so much easier to be... It's hard to be brave. And I think it has to be done fairly consciously a lot of the time. Anyway, yeah, we certainly don't need less courage in the world. I think we all need to be brave. So with that, I'll say that, well, I guess that really finishes me up. To me, I feel like I've really wound up emotionally as a lived experience. My experience is that art making is a moral act. That it, a bit like, you know, art, that God makes stuff and it is good. So is, I think there's actually heaps of nuance to that, but for our purposes today, I think if you make something, it is good. Now, how you then present it to the world, or whether you present it to the world, that is a bit different. That's where you want to start thinking a bit more about morals. But I think it is good to create no matter what you are creating. Just then have an editing process of some sort. That's what I think. But what do you think? Because I'm just a guy. So yeah, please engage with me on this. Maybe you found some of what I said inflammatory. There was certainly a lot of talk about Hitler, so that might get some talk going. Like, subscribe. Let me know if there was a particular direction you liked or something, because I really love talking to myself like this, and I want to keep doing it. But if if there's like some way I can also like serve you, if I can give you, you know, yeah, if I can cover a topic you like or something, yeah. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I'm thinking of starting some sort of a community, like a Discord or something. I don't really know what that is, but my friend told me it's a good thing to have for like community theoretical discussion. So let me know if you think I should do that too. Like, subscribe, check out my music. Lots of love. Bye.